afternoon. I hope you've had a very productive and engaging day. I have one quick announcement. This was left in one of the breakout sessions. I missed which room it was, unfortunately. So if this is your phone, oh, right here. It's got an otter case, light blue. Oh, breakout room 7, Marriott Ballroom 7. If you're looking for your phone, please find it at the registration desk afterwards, or find me if you come immediately afterwards. I have the great pleasure to welcome up to introduce our next speaker, my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Lisa Stevenson from West Kentucky Community and Technical College. Lisa not only spearheaded the effort to get West Kentucky through NACEP accreditation, but for some time also shouldered the burdens of being seconded at the system office, working with all 15 of her peers around the state on a variety of dual credit improvement projects. So with no further ado, let's turn it over to Lisa.
Good afternoon. Before I introduce our speaker this afternoon, I want to say thanks to y'all for coming to Kentucky for this conference. Those of us involved in concurrent enrollment in the Commonwealth hope you've enjoyed your time in Louisville. We welcome you to come back anytime you want, and please have safe travels home. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce Robert King, President of the Kentucky Council on Postsecondary Education. President King is a true champion of education. He is a collaborator who encourages others to collaborate, secondary and post-secondary partners, as well as business and industry. President King supports the alignment of curriculum, programs, policies, and assessments to provide educational opportunities for all in the Commonwealth, as well as helping to ensure student success. President King recognized the importance of including NACEP standards as guiding principles for the Kentucky dual credit policy. There is a lot going on in the state of Kentucky around dual credit with a dual credit scholarship, an increase in dual credit enrollment. He is one of those people that is our cheerleader, and he encourages us to go that extra mile for our students. So please join me in welcoming President King.
Well, good afternoon, and Lisa, thank you very much, and thank all of you both for including Kentucky on your travels this year. We're always delighted to have people come and see this beautiful state. You may be able to tell that I am not a native, but as the governor says, I am here by choice, enjoying my 8th year in this work. And also, I should tell you that Sue Kane, who I suspect many of you have met or heard from, I have the pleasure of seeing and hearing from her daily. She is a great advocate for the work that you do, and in particular, this notion of embedding the NACEP principles into our policy really was vital to the work that I'm about to describe to you. As we move forward. This organization continues, I believe, to lead the way in making sure that if we're going to do this and accelerate these opportunities for young people in our country, we need to do it right. And we need to recognize that simply because a particular course is being offered in a high school or in some other place, maybe not on a college campus, does not mean that it is somehow either less rigorous or that the content is somehow reduced, that we want and need to be certain that the students who participate in these programs do so and experience a true university or college level experience. And this organization, in my view, works very hard to assure that the quality and the rigor of these programs is what we and our accreditors expect. I have this PowerPoint, which I'm going to go through, but I thought as I was sitting here that maybe I would ask this question to you, and then I'm going to answer it. But the question is, why would we do this at all? I mean, high school's high school, college is college. Why should the two be integrated in any way? And why bother accelerating opportunities for our students? In my dark, distant past, I was the chancellor of the State University of New York. And during my time there, I had the opportunity to hear a speech by a woman who was then the president of Duke University. And she was talking about how different higher education and its trajectory has been in the United States compared to the rest of the world. And she was essentially saying that this country, going all the way back into the Civil War, or just actually during the Civil War with the adoption of the first Morrill Act, which was the land-grant college law, adopted in 1862, made a public policy decision which was to make available to people who were not fortunate enough to be born into wealthy families or those who were politically connected, and give those families and those people an opportunity to access higher education. In most of the other countries of the world, and many even today, access to higher education is limited to the wealthy and to members of whatever the elites are in those countries. And so when I got back from President Cohen's speech, I started thinking about it, and I wondered whether or not that policy decision in the United States was in any way connected to the growth of the American economy. And in case we don't think about these things, it was not a foregone conclusion back at the time of the Revolution or in the early days of the country in the early 1800s that this place was going to amount to much. And so I was able to identify this brilliant economist at the University of Buffalo, and I asked him whether or not there was enough data around to answer that question. And after several months of assessment, he came back to me and he said, you know, what I think I've learned from all of this, and it's not that it was a great mystery to him, but he now had some data to put around his thinking about it, was that there were three things that, in his view, differentiated the growth of the American economy compared to the growth of other economies going back into the early 1800s up through about the year 2000. And if you think about it, if you go back, and we used 1820, and I picked that year only because at that point the Revolution was over, the War of 1812 was over, and we were a real country. If there had been a G8 in those days, we wouldn't have been a member because our economy was too small relative to the other powers at the time. And those other powers, all predominantly European or China, and I think Japan was on that list if I remember correctly, they had capital, they had mineral resources, either because it was indigenous to their countries or they had exploited it through conquest of other lands, India and Africa, et cetera, okay? But the different, and so they had all the stuff, plus they had universities. But the difference over this period of 180 years was first that this country adopted a free enterprise economy compared to socialism or communism or national socialism or feudalism or whatever they were doing in those places. Second, we made high school universal 40 years before any other country. And this was right around World War I. State by state, they said a basic education is not just 6th grade or 8th grade, it's high school. And finally, and he said most importantly, making access to higher education has been America's great secret. And so at the end of World War II, if you recall, there was something called the GI Bill. The GI Bill made access and availability to higher education expansive. And what was so vital was the decision to make high school university 30 years earlier meant that the students, the young people coming back from World War II, were academically ready to go to college. As a consequence of all that, I learned something that was really interesting. The year I graduated from college, which was probably a year before many of you were born, the percentage of people in the United States that had a bachelor's degree as a percentage of the population was double the next nearest country. And so if you look at the 20th century, it is not a mystery why this country became the economic colossus that it did. It wasn't just the factory owner or the company owner that had a bachelor's degree. It was the person running the factory floor and the marketing department and the HR department. There was just enormous talent. And so, as I said, we had twice the percentage of people in our population with a bachelor's degree as the next nearest country, which happened to be Great Britain at the time. In the intervening now nearly 50 years, here's what's happened. We've gone from about 23% of the population to about 30 or 31% with a bachelor's degree. I'll pick one country, South Korea. At that same time, the starting point, they had 8% of their population with a bachelor's degree. Today it's about 35%. And countries that you would have never dreamed of being economically competitive with the United States today are educating or have educated proportions of their population to very high levels, equal to or surpassing our own. And so I tell you this just to try and put in some context why what you're doing and supporting is so important. Because we need more of our people, more highly educated, if we are going to remain a competitive and productive economy in the 21st century. Because the competition out there for high-wage jobs is ferocious. One last thing, and then I'll get to my brilliant PowerPoint. There was a study that was done about 2 or 3 years ago by the Gallup Corporation, and what they attempted in the study to do was to assess what people wanted most in every country on the globe. So it took them 7 years to develop an instrument that was culturally and language-wise appropriate, and they did their survey. Here's what they found. That the vast majority of people in every country said that what they wanted most was a job that consumed at least 30 hours a week and paid enough compensation to not require a second job to support a family. There's about 3 billion people on the planet who want that. The problem is there's currently only about 1.2 billion jobs that meet those requirements. So if you sense the competition for jobs, the title of the book that describes this, by the way, is called The Coming Jobs War. And if you think about the United States, we are accustomed to high wages in exchange for the best talent on the planet. But as I mentioned before, these other countries, many of which you would have never believed could be competitive with the United States, South Korea, Estonia, the Czech Republic, are now outproducing people that are very highly educated. In China, while the percentages aren't as high because the population is so big, just in raw numbers, they have more people in credible what are the programs? I'm blanking on it. Oh goodness. Honors programs at their colleges than we have students in all of our universities. So the competition for those jobs is ferocious. And one way to compete for them is to lower our wages because those people in those countries are willing to work for a fraction of what Americans work for. But that doesn't seem like a winning formula. It seems to me the most important and effective strategy is to regain that quality edge that we enjoyed for most of the 20th century. So that's the context in which I see your work as being so vitally important. And with that, let me share with you what we've been doing over the last couple years here in Kentucky. I know you've heard some bits and pieces of this, but I will try to give you a more comprehensive overview. First is, we had this panel of educators, both K-12, higher ed, members of the legislature, members of the State Department of Education, who sat down and learned about what was going on in other places. Took advantage of the Education Commission of the state study on this because they had collected a set of best practices. And we used that information as well as the NACEP guiding principles to help us set our own guiding principles here in Kentucky. And this was all done, as I just mentioned, collaboratively with participants from each of the different sectors that participate in this work. Here are the key policy components that we agreed to. The first was that we would make available to every student in every high school in this state a minimum of 3 general education courses carrying at least 3 credit hours apiece, and 3 career and technical education courses aligned with identifiable career pathways. We agreed that the cost of delivering these programs would be shared by the state, by the post-secondary institutions, by schools and school districts, state-funded scholarships, as well as students and families. We wanted to make sure that the credits that were being earned were fully transferable in the participating or to the participating higher education institutions. I don't know if some of you experienced something that we've experienced here in Kentucky, but for example, for our community colleges, we had something called articulated credit. And we ultimately decided, if you understand what that is, that that would not count. That if the course that you were offering as a community college only awarded articulated credit, that didn't meet our definition of either dual credit or, in the context of this meeting, concurrent enrollment. We had to be sure that the quality of the coursework met the accrediting standards of our regional accreditor, which is that acronym that we refer to as SACS, C-O-C-S. It's far too long. It's the Southern Association of Colleges, Schools, blah, blah, blah. Most important in that was that the faculty credentialing standards had to meet SACS regionally accrediting standards. That says, by the way, that if you are teaching in a particular discipline, you have to have had 18 post-secondary credit hours in that discipline. So part of the challenge here for us is growing that cohort of high school teachers who satisfy that requirement. And part of the strategy, obviously, particularly in those high schools that are more remote physically from our college and community college campuses, will have the teaching core that they need to address this part of the policy. We would set up an advisory council that's made up of all of the different constituencies, including our financing agency, which I'll talk about when I get to the scholarship program. And they would serve as an advisory council to make sure that these policies were being adhered to. As I mentioned already, that we would encourage the participating organizations to meet NACEP accrediting standards, and that there would be ongoing professional development for our participating teachers. Let me give you some quick numbers. These are actual credit hours that are being earned by our students in the years 2010 through 2014-15. You can see we had a dip in there. The colors are by institution. The blue is the community and technical college enrollment. The red is the comprehensive universities, and the green are our private and independent colleges, and then the purple at the bottom are our research campuses. You can see a couple of things. Number one, that the predominant provider has been our community and technical colleges. but the role that the comprehensives and the private and independent colleges are playing is increasing. And I will tell you that in data we just got this morning that Sue was able to wrestle out of the State Department of Education and our financing agency, the number of students, and this is a result, we believe, of the new scholarship program that I'm about to describe to you, that the number of students participating this fall has increased 30% over last year, and the number of credit hours that they are pursuing has increased 40%. So the impact, at least in this first implementation of the scholarship program, has been pretty impressive. Here's what the scholarship does. It is available to juniors and seniors attending public high schools. There is a discussion going on right now whether or not to extend the program to students who are attending private parochial schools or who are being homeschooled. Second, the courses that are eligible for the scholarship have to be the general education courses and those career and technical ed courses that lead to an industry-recognized certificate. Students in a single year can benefit from the scholarship to cover up to 6 credit hours of either gen ed or career and technical ed, and they're entitled over their 2 years, junior and senior, to a scholarship covering up to 9 credit hours during the time in high school. Just to be sure that students are entitled to take more than 6 hours, but if they do in a given year, then the cost, if there is a cost, is on them versus being covered by the scholarship. But they would be entitled, by the way, to pay the same tuition rate that the scholarship covers, which is a ceiling that covers all of the participating dual credit institutions, which is currently 1/3 the per credit hour rate at our community and technical colleges, which I think is around $52 per credit hour. And the goals are, I'm sure, not any different than the goals in your state. We want to increase the college-going rate, and we think this will help in part, and it's not on the bullet, but I think it allows youngsters to see that if they're successful, that they can actually do work at this level. But that is also why it's so important that the rigor and the quality of these courses are not simply slightly jacked up high school courses, but are legitimate university and community college courses. We want students to be assured that the courses they're taking will be credit generating and that those credits are fully transferable. This will, of course, reduce the cost of college, first because the rate that they're getting these credit hours taken at is so much reduced over what our regular community and technical college or university students are paying. And this can accelerate time to completion of an associate or a bachelor's degree. The program finances in this program are administered by the same agency in our state that manages Pell Grants, manages all the state-funded financial aid, and manages student loans to our universities and community colleges. KHEAA is the Kentucky Higher Education Assistance Authority. We call it KIA. Over the budget cycle, we have a 2-year budget in Kentucky. What had happened, by the way, is the legislature over the last several years was siphoning money out of the state lottery, which was to pay for student financial aid, and using it to pave sidewalks and stuff like that. And the new administration came in and recaptured all of that money and said, no, it's coming back into student financial aid. And so they took $15 million of that amount that had been siphoned away over the last several years and are applying it, as you can see on the slide there, about $3.75 million this first semester, and we expect that that number will go up once we have some experience with the program and probably equal out the way the funds are distributed. The dollars are allocated each semester to the public high schools, and it's based on the number of seniors who enrolled during the previous academic year. And as I said, the campuses only get paid, however, if a student successfully completes the course, and then they get paid at the $52 per credit hour. The advisory council that I mentioned, which is part of our policy, is designed to promote best practices, and we will learn those from you as much as from any other source. We want to make sure that the participating institutional dual credit agreements that will be signed between our institutions and their individual districts or high schools meet our criteria. We will monitor all of this, provide an accountability system to track our dual credit students. Ultimately, it's important to know whether or not it has achieved, the plan has achieved the objectives that we have set out. And we want to know also how these students fare once they get to our institutions. Did they take the next level course, and how did they perform in those courses? We will submit annual reports to my board and to the State Board of Education and our legislature. We'll also be monitoring other accelerated opportunities, including AP and International Baccalaureate type programs. And we will be making recommendations for continuous improvement of each of these elements of what we do. And so, next steps, we are looking for ways to significantly assure that we meet the accrediting standards and the qualification standards for our high school teachers who will be teaching these courses. We're currently in the process of working with our universities who are offering master's degree programs to modify what we call our teacher leader master's programs so that they are more content rich, and then to create some kind of recognition on the master's degree that indicates that the particular master's degree holder has met the SAC standards regarding the ability to be certified to teach dual credit courses. That's the deal. And again, I am delighted that you chose Kentucky. We're very proud of our state and proud of the work we're doing. And I don't know if you have time for questions, but I'm happy to take them, or comments or criticisms or anything that you might have. Yeah. No, that would be a choice that our students or our mid-career teachers can take. If they're interested in moving into an administrative pathway, you'd have a separate program for that. But you know, for many of, and I think this is true across the country, that many of our states require that our teachers secure a master's degree by a certain point in their career, or in order to achieve a certain rank and certain compensation level. And what we know is that the content of many of those programs, frankly, could be in anything. And so in an effort to address the need for dual credit programs, particularly in our rural schools and those that are more remote from our campuses, we know that we've got to find a way to incentivize and make clear what teachers need to do to qualify. And so the campuses are agreeing to modify a portion of their master's program so that it really is targeted at the population of teachers who want to be able to do this. But that would not diminish the content that you'd see in a principal preparation program. They'd just be treated separately. Okay. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you meant about monitor the IB and AP courses under your plan?
You know, we see IP or AP and IB as other ways to allow students to accumulate college credit And so our thought, and we haven't finalized exactly how we're going to do it, but we recognize the need to pay attention to the students who choose those pathways as opposed to dual credit, see how the results compare so that we have some sense of whether or not there's an equation between them in terms of the rigor and content of the courses and the capacity of the courses to adequately prepare the students for whatever the next level is when they get to a college or university. How we'll measure that, we haven't yet decided, but that's what our intention is. Does that answer your question? Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you so much.